I'm also pretty sure I saw some, just because you were talking about some misconceptions earlier, I saw some content that you put out, must have been a while back, about some of the maybe misconceptions people have about modesty in Judaism. And first of all, thinking it only applies to women, and secondly, what it's all about. And like, no, we're not saying that, like, God forbid someone should think like if you don't dress modestly, you're inviting, you know, like inappropriate looks and all that kind of thing. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I I think it's very important to talk about tzniut, especially with young secular women, which I'm now working in Kiruv. I now work in Jewish outreach, so I work with a lot of secular women. And when you grow up, again, if you're growing up in a Christian-centric society, and even this is permeated through some Jewish communities, this idea of purity culture, which is very, very toxic. There can be a lot of pushback to dressing in a certain way, to dressing modestly, because we see so many times people asking, God forbid, when a woman is assaulted, well, what was she wearing? Which is a stupid, stupid question. It has nothing to do with anything, and so it's very important, first off, to say that men are obligated to cover the same things that we are. The reason why we don't talk about modesty to men as much is because they don't struggle with it. This is obviously an overgeneralization. They don't struggle with it as much. And on the other hand, you have Shmiras Einayim, which is guarding your eyes and not looking at things, not looking at nakedness, which women never hear about because we don't really struggle with it, whereas men do. So they do hear about it more. Again, this is an overgeneralization, but again, two sides to the same coin, basically. But I think when we're talking about stuff like tzniut and shomer negia, which is not touching a member of the opposite sex who isn't your immediate family or your spouse, people don't necessarily know that it is there to protect women. And they think that because women are seeking protection, then therefore this is victim blaming, which is not the case at all. If you, arm yourself because you're in a dangerous area and someone, God forbid, like mugs you or whatever, and you take out your weapon and defend yourself, you having the weapon is not an invitation, or is not to say that if you didn't have the weapon, you should have been mugged, et cetera, et cetera. It's just, you're there to protect yourself, and it's important to protect yourself. And those two truths can exist. You can protect yourself and know that it's not your fault if you do get, God forbid, assaulted. I think that, unfortunately, when you're hearing all these stories of women who say no, or they reject someone, and then they get either violently assaulted or, God forbid, murdered, it makes you feel as though you don't have the right to say no sometimes. And you feel like your agency and your ability to consent has been taken away from you in a sense. And so when you have this barrier called shomer negia, where it's like, it's not me, I'm not rejecting you, this is just the principles which I live by, I'm an Orthodox Jew, I just don't touch, it's not a personal thing anymore. And it gives you the right to consent, because if you feel under duress in some sort of situation, and most of the times when I talk to him and, I ask, have you ever been in a situation where someone was making a move on you and your brain is screaming no, and you just can't say no? Almost every single time, if not every single time I've asked that to a woman, she says, yes, I've been in that situation. It's a very unfortunate situation. And this is a barrier against that, because if you feel like you can't say no, then you can't consent. There's no way to consent if you can't say no. And so Judaism takes this idea that it's not until you're in a fully committed, trusting relationship that you can have real consent, because there's always that fear of violence or torture, or this is spoken about a little bit in the Gemara, because there's that fear that, like, what if he, takes this no and hurts me because of it? It completely takes that away, because the only way you're touching a man who you're not related to is if you're in this trusting relationship called marriage.
Right. And what about like the on the flip side, the positive side of modesty, and it being, I had a great talk recently about it. In fact, it's not primarily about clothing. It's a certain frame of I mean, it is, but it's not primarily. It's about a certain frame of mind and frame of conducting relationships, which is that he actually asked a fascinating question. He said, why is it, and it actually cuts to the core of literally like so much of Jewish philosophy, believe it or not, because everyone, I'm sure you've been asked the question, if there's a God, why can't I see him? Why can't we see God? And it's Rabbi Manis Friedman who did a video of this, and he said it's because God doesn't want to be seen, he wants to be known. Meaning that if we were to... it's so good. But meaning that if we were to see God, we could see him, we'd be very impressed at how big he is, how smart he is, how all these kind of things. But then after a while, I'd be like, okay, I've seen him now, and that's it, I've got to know him, and we might lose interest. Whereas God is exquisitely deep and infinitely deep, and there's more to know, and also sensitive, and there's more sensitivity to build over time. And if we can't see him, then the intrigue remains there, and the ability not to just get satisfied with what is and what you've seen and move on, but actually to look deeper and go literally beneath the surface. And so that's what God wants of us, for having a relationship with us, because he wants us to have an infinite level of connection and knowledge to him. But the same applies with human relationships. And the spirit of modesty is basically saying, if you're here just to get to know me at a very superficial level, that's not actually me. So if you really want to know me and get to know me, then great, but we're going to have to, that's not just about what you see at a surface level. I want to really go deep and connect.
Absolutely. Another thing that has modesty as kind of a standard for it, which I don't think we think about a lot, is the Torah itself. We think, oh, it's the best book, it's given by God, we should just have it all rolled out so that we can see the whole thing at all times. And that's not what we do. For the most part, the Torah is dressed in beautiful clothes and wearing its little crown, and it's in its place, and it's only at specific appropriate times where it would be beneficial to our relationship with God, that we uncover it. And even then, we don't usually uncover the whole thing, only bits and pieces. And it really is about, it all goes back to Gan Eden, where, in the beginning, Adam and Eve were naked, and it wasn't until the sin that they felt the need to cover themselves. And that's because they went from being mostly spiritual beings to mostly perceiving spirituality to mostly perceiving physicality. And so if I am showing my body, you are seeing what you see. You're seeing the physical form. And when I choose to cover it, you are forced to see the spiritual form. And this is why in Judaism, we don't believe in covering the face, and we don't believe in covering the hands. We think that those are important to keep out, because this is how, we're Jews, we talk with our hands. This is how we express our soul, is through our face and our hands. And so we leave those uncovered. But everything else, I want you to see my soul, not my body. And I want to be recognized as a soul and not a body. And especially growing up in a place like California, where, a lot of the emphasis, especially as a young woman, is on how you look, and is on how, it's on how much men want to look at you. It's very much about objectification. And unfortunately, that has turned into auto-objectification. We believe that because, men objectifying us is bad, but us objectifying ourselves is somehow liberation. It's not. It's just us deluding ourselves into thinking that because we made the choice to objectify ourselves, that we're liberated. But the true liberation is not being an object at all, is accepting that you are a human being and a soul, and trying to communicate to the rest of the world that you are a soul. And modesty is one of the ways to do that.
What do you think, what would be your advice to people, especially if they grow up in especially body conscious societies, and especially if they're young and they're very vulnerable to these kinds of pressures? What would be your advice to someone going through that?
My advice would be to, especially to young women, try for just a week to not touch any of your guy friends and to dress modestly. So you don't have to dress by like the Haredi standard. Just, wear long pants and like cover your shoulders and your midriff, and just refuse to touch your guy friends for a week and see how that feels, and just see what that does to your male friendships and to your female friendships. I think it was very eye-opening for me when I was on the Akiva trip. The first thing I wanted to try out was Shomer Negia, because I had been talking with my rabbi about it for a really long time, and I was just very interested in this concept. And I was like, okay, for these 2 weeks, I'm not going to touch guys. And it was incredible how much I realized how much of what I'd been doing had been in competition with other women, in competition for male attention. And it was just all of a sudden, I felt so open to real deep female friendships. Not that I didn't have them before, but there was always this underlying that, like, if a guy is walking past, you have to make yourself look good. You have to be. I was actually recently having a conversation about how in the Jewish dating world, people will recommend the people that they went out with to go out with their friends. So like, if it doesn't work out, they'll be like, you know what, you're not for me, but you should date my friend because you guys would be really good together, which is the exact opposite of the secular world. And that's because there's not this feeling of competition when you understand, hey, I'm here to find my Bashert, I'm here to find my soulmate, and there's only one. And if he's not my soulmate, good for him, let him go on his way. I hope he finds his soulmate too. It's not this, oh, I have to compete. I have to get as many guys to like me so I have as many options as possible to pick from. It's so just relaxed, and I feel like it's so much more healthy.
And yeah, it's healthy and safer. And ultimately, it's true. It's what people really want. People don't want to be spending their life competing. It's horrific. Who wants that? It seems pretty clear to me that most people, who wouldn't want to just find their person, life with them
and feel secure.
And then if it's not your person and you think your best friend would be great with this person, like, why is that an issue? In the secular world, to date your best friend's ex would be the worst possible thing you could do to your friend, and here it's just, oh, I went out with this guy, I think he'd be great for you. It's so normal. I really, really love that.
Yeah, it's often a result of also shorter dating times as well.
Yeah,
there's less emotional attachment, and so it's less awkward for friends or whatever. So please consult some good advice before doing anything like that. But it's a nuanced question. But yes, I agree with the principle.